Hey Fundraiser, I'm Mary Petersen, and this is Hey Fundraiser, the podcast for development professionals who are done guessing and ready to build a major gift program that actually works. Every week, I bring you the tactics, the language, and the real-world strategy to close bigger gifts, deepen donor relationships, and lead with confidence. Whether you're a one-person shop or a seasoned major gift officer, if you're ready to stop hoping and start engineering, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Hey Fundraiser, let's talk about one of the most powerful people you can bring into a major donor relationship, your CEO. When the right CEO walks into a donor meeting prepared, focused, and confident, it can completely change the energy in the room. The donor sees leadership and vision. They see accountability. They see someone who is responsible for turning generosity into meaningful change. But when a CEO walks into that same meeting unprepared, talks for 45 minutes, shares, I don't know, every organizational detail since 1987, interrupts the donor, or even starts negotiating the gift before anybody has even asked for a gift, well, for the love, like that can change the energy in the room too. CEOs are extraordinary partners in major gift fundraising, but not every CEO is a natural fundraiser. And honestly, they don't need to be. Your CEO does not need to become a major gift officer. They need to become an effective storyteller, an effective listener, and an ambassador for the mission, which they already are. And it's our job as fundraisers to help them do that. Today, I want to talk to you about how to prepare and coach your CEO for a major donor meeting. So I want to go over what is a CEO's role, how to prepare the right messaging, how to coach their storytelling, how to talk about body language without making it awkward, and how to prepare for donor objections and difficult questions. And then how to keep your CEO from unintentionally hijacking the meeting. And I also want to tell you about a CEO I coached before an important donor conversation and how that preparation helped him build confidence with that donor. Because that is one of the most important things a CEO can do in a major gift meeting is build confidence, not just excitement, not just affection, but confidence. Confidence that the organization has a plan, confidence that the leadership team understands the problem that the organization is trying to fix, confidence that the donor's gift will be handled responsibly, and that the organization can actually deliver on the outcome that it's promising. These are your CEO's superpowers, in the room. So, first and foremost, let's just say this out up front. Your CEO is not the fundraiser. That's your job, dear fundraiser. So, let's begin with one of the biggest mistakes that organizations make. They bring the CEO into a meeting without clearly defining anyone's role. The fundraiser assumes, and we've all been there, that the CEO knows what to do. I mean, they're a CEO for heaven's sake. So you think that they know. And the CEO assumes that the fundraiser wants them to lead. Then the meeting begins and everyone's waiting for someone else to take control. Or worse, the CEO takes complete control. The CEO tells the donor everything. They talk about staffing and the strategic plan and the new software system that's about to launch. And, there's a board retreat coming up and the whole organization history. And then there's, the parking problem. And then, I don't know, 40 minutes later, the donor has barely said a word. That's not a donor meeting. That's like an organizational presentation with a hostage, frankly. So before any major donor meeting, you have to clarify roles. Like who's going to open the conversation? Who's going to ask the donor questions? Who's going to tell a mission story? Who will explain the opportunity? Who will actually make the ask? Who is responsible if the donor raises a concern? And then who will close the meeting? I mean, these are all things that I like to prepare a CEO for. And you don't want to assume that everybody just knows their role. I made that mistake, fundraiser, for too many years. So please don't make that mistake. Um, really talk about it, like write it down, rehearse it. Your CEO's role will vary depending on where you are in the relationship with the donor. So, for example, if this is an early cultivation meeting, you're taking your CEO with you, they may be there primarily to listen, to connect, to communicate the vision. But in a later meeting, right, the relationship is more established. That same CEO might explain why a particular investment matters right now in this moment of time. During a solicitation, the CEO might communicate institutional commitment while the fundraiser makes the actual ask. And then in a stewardship meeting, the CEO might thank the donor and show how the donor's investment is influencing the future of the organization. The CEO's job is not just automatically run the meeting. And I know it's hard to break them of that because they're the CEO. They run a lot of meetings. The CEO's job is to play the most valuable role for that particular donor at that particular point in the relationship. But the fundraiser should always still lead the strategy. I want to say that very clearly. The most senior person in the room does not automatically become the person responsible for the fundraising strategy. That is the fundraiser's job. So you know the donor, you know the relationship history, you know what the donor cares about, you have spent time with this donor, you know what they've already heard, you know what questions they're likely to ask, you know whether the purpose of the meeting is discovery or cultivation, solicitation, or just a thank you stewardship meeting. Your CEO may know more about the organization than anyone else in the room, but you should know more about the donor relationship. And that means you need to brief your CEO. And I don't mean forwarding them like a 3-page prospect research document, an hour before the meeting. Like, that's not the right preparation. That's like paperwork. Your CEO needs a focused briefing that answers a handful of essential questions. Like, who is this donor? What do they care about? What have they funded in the past? What change in the world do they want to make? Where are we in the relationship? What do we want to accomplish in this meeting, right? Every meeting should have a goal. What topic should we emphasize? What topics should we avoid? Very important. What questions are we likely to hear? And maybe what does success look like when we leave that room? The CEO doesn't need to know every single piece of information that you have ever collected about the donor. They need the information that's going to help them connect to the donor. And that's not everything. And frankly, if you send like a 10-page, report from your database that has all the actions and all the things and all the emails they've received, your CEO is not going to read it anyway, fundraiser. So I once worked with a CEO, cared deeply about the organization, and could speak with enormous passion about the mission. I mean, this CEO, he was smart and committed and absolutely credible. But fundraising meetings were not always comfortable. And I think it's because this CEO felt pressure that he needed to have all the answers. And because of that pressure, his instinct was to prepare more information, right? More numbers, more history, deeper descriptions of programs, more details about how everything worked. And the CEO believed that confidence would come from knowing more. But in a donor meeting, knowing more is not always the same as communicating better, if that makes sense. So we had this important meeting coming up with a donor, and they were seriously considering a deeper investment, like 7-figure deeper investment. The donor... Hey, fundraiser, before you sign up for another fundraising conference where you might leave with a good tote bag but zero strategy to raise more money, let me invite you to Major Gift Momentum. This is my private coaching group where you'll get weekly coaching calls with me, access to my full Major Gift curriculum, and a community that's actually moving the needle. Major Gift Momentum isn't based in theory, it's based in action.
members are closing 5- and 6-figure gifts within 3 months of joining. Heather just closed a $245,000 gift. Jacelyn just closed a $212,000 campaign gift. And Georgette just got a $500,000 commitment. All within 3 months of joining Momentum. Each of these Momentum members didn't think the donor would give that much, but once I taught them my method, they are raising money at a whole new level. So would you like in fundraiser? If you do, go to heyfundraiser.com/momentum and let's get started.
She cared about the mission. We did not need to convince the donor that the work mattered. What the donor needed really was confidence in the leadership and confidence in the direction of the organization and confidence that this was the right team to take the important work forward. So instead of giving my CEO this giant briefing pack, which was never going to get read, I mean, not just him, any CEO, and saying like, good luck, Godspeed, we really sat down and went through the entire meeting. First, we clarified the goal. What do we want to accomplish from this meeting? And then once he understood that, he I could see his shoulders stop touching his ears, right? Like for him, the goal was always like, I need to perform. I need to be the smartest person in the room about the organization. And while that's true, that's not always the goal, right? So once we really clarified the goal of the meeting, he was like, oh, okay. And frankly, the goal was not to help explain every program. The goal was not to prove how smart we were. The goal was to help the donor understand where the organization was going and why leadership believed that this very next step was essential. So then we narrowed down the CEO's message to 3 things. And then he was so comfortable going in. So these 3 things were, here's the challenge we see, here's what we believe is possible, and here is why we're prepared to act now. Like that was it. 3 core messages. Then we chose 1 story, not 4 stories, not 6 stories, not a parade of statistics. 1 story that showed the donor what was at stake and what could change. And we really, we actually spent 2 hours practicing the story until it was clear and natural, but not memorized word for word. I didn't want the CEO to sound rehearsed, but at the same time, he really needed some guidance. I wanted him to sound ready. And there's a difference, right, between ready and rehearsed. We also talked about what the CEO should not do. And this was, as a fundraiser, this was actually harder to coach the CEO than all the other things I coached that day. But what I really worked with him on was not to answer every question immediately, not to interrupt silence, like to let it sit for a second, not to fill every pause. We talked about not making promises that he and I had not discussed before the meeting. We were not going to reduce the gift amount because the donor might have looked surprised, right? Like I didn't want him to react to the nonverbal cues of the donor. And we agreed not to introduce 3 additional projects in the middle of this conversation that we wanted this 1 donor to fund. We also decided that we were not going to start solving an objection before we fully understood it. So that was a lot. That was like in itself another 30-minute conversation, but super helpful because once I had that conversation and kind of, I'm doing air quotes, training with him, he knew that then for every donor meeting moving forward, which was kind of nice. So it was a good time investment for him. It was a good time investment for me. Then we role played. I asked the CEO the questions I thought the donor might ask, like, why does this need to happen now? And how do you know this approach is going to work? And what happens if we don't raise all the money? How will my gift be used? What makes this different from what you're already doing? Why should I fund this instead of another organization doing similar work? Now, at first, The CEO tried to answer each question with a mountain of information. So we just kept refining. We worked on shorter answers, clearer answers, answers that acknowledged the donor's concern before responding to it. Because what was happening was he was getting very defensive, and we just kind of had to work through that. So instead of immediately launching into a defense, we practiced saying, "Oh, that's such a fair question," or "I totally understand why you would want to know something like that," or "Let me tell you how we're approaching it," or "That's something that we've thought about carefully." Like these are phrases that matter, and they were phrases that this my CEO was not using before. And they show the donor that the CEO is not threatened by the question. And this is very important. A donor asking a difficult question is not necessarily a donor saying no. Often, they're just trying to decide whether they can trust you, that they can trust this CEO. So by the time we walked into that meeting, the CEO was not carrying the weight. I mean, he was carrying so much weight of having to perform. Instead, he knew his role. He knew the three messages. He knew the story we agreed he would tell. And he knew where I would step in and where he would step in. And the CEO also knew that it was perfectly acceptable to say, "I want to confirm some details and get back to you," because he didn't feel comfortable with that before. He felt like he needed to know all the answers. Let me tell you, fundraiser, this meeting was so good. It was so different than all the other meetings I had taken him on. I had assumed he knew his role. He had assumed he needed to be the CEO, the leader, the knowing everything, performing. Once we broke all that down, this meeting was so good. He was present. He listened. He did not rush. And when the donor asked a challenging question, he did not become defensive. He did not drown the donor in information. There was a short pause. He acknowledged the concern, and then he answered it clearly. Swoon. And you could feel the donor's confidence growing. And that was a win, in my humble opinion, fundraiser. So the CEO did not leave the meeting having delivered this perfect speech. He left having strengthened the donor's belief in the organization's leadership. And that is what excellent preparation can do. So let's kind of break this down. One of the best things you can do for your CEO is help them narrow the message. You want to prepare 3 messages, not 30. CEOs, they live in the entire organization, right? Like they think about budget and board and staff and programs and the community and the building and the infrastructure and the strategic plan. And then like what happens if a crisis occurs at 7 in the morning or 10:30 at night? The donor's not living all of that. So there's a natural disconnect, right, between where the CEO lives and where the donor lives. The donor needs a clear path into the conversation. So before the meeting, just identify the 3 most important things the donor should understand. Not 12, not 6, 3. For example, here are 3, like off the top of my head, things that you might prepare your CEO with. One would be maybe the need is growing faster than the current capacity, right? Like articulate that. Articulate that your organization has a proven way to address the issue. And third, that this particular investment will allow the organization to serve significantly more people without maybe compromising quality. Okay, so there's 3 examples. Here's another one. The community is changing. The current model that the organization has was built for a different moment in time. And 3, this project positions the organization to meet the needs that they're seeing today, not in 1994. Sorry, now I can't stop. Okay, here's another example. The program is working, but demand is increasing, right? So there's 2 messages. And then the third would be, we've reached the point where philanthropic investment can take some can take something effective and make it transformational. Okay, so your CEO should be able to communicate whatever your 3 points are very simply. You're not trying to strip away substance. You're trying to really create clarity. And for the CEO and for the staffers who literally live in the organization all day long, they understand things. You have acronyms and phrases and things that you use inside the organization that the donor doesn't know. The donor doesn't live in the organization. They don't need all that information. They need clarity. Clarity builds confidence. Confusion breaks confidence down. So, so we covered the 3 things. The next thing is your CEO really needs to be a great storyteller. And oftentimes, your CEO is the perfect person to tell the biggest organizational story. Like the fundraiser, you are going to know the donor story. The program leads, they know the participant story. The CEO can connect all these stories together and then pair it with the future of the mission. Like that is incredibly valuable. But the CEO needs to tell stories, not deliver annual reports out loud. You might have heard me say this before. I've said it in coaching. I can't remember if I've said it on the podcast, but a lot of times CEOs and fundraisers get into what I call brochure brain, where they just start like riffing these stats that don't connect and they don't land. So a strong CEO story usually includes like 4 things. First, what are we seeing as an organization? Second, why does it matter? Third, what are we doing about it? And lastly, what becomes possible with the partnership of the donor that's sitting across the table from you and the CEO? So let me give you an example. So it might be something like this. Over the past year, we have seen more families coming to us at the moment when one expected expense could cause them to lose their housing. We know that if we intervene early, we can prevent months or even years of instability for that family. That's why we are building a more flexible response fund. It allows us to act before a family reaches crisis. So, you leaning in today, your support would give our team the ability to say yes at exactly the right moment and make the biggest difference possible. Right? So that's a story of organizational vision. It tells the donor what leadership sees. It tells the donor what leadership believes, and it tells the donor what leadership intends to do. And it also, and bonus points for this, it gives the donor a place in the story, which is a beautiful thing. Okay, now one thing I just want to caution you on is you don't want to overscript your CEO. Like there's a temptation to write every word for your CEO. Been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. Sometimes that's necessary for like a formal presentation, but in a donor meeting, overscripting your CEO makes them sound stiff or distant or like overly polished. You don't want overly polished. You want to be able to connect your CEO with this donor. So instead of writing a complete speech, I would give my CEO like a message map. And this is what it would contain: the meeting goal, first and foremost. It could be, I want to deepen the relationship and introduce this program to the donor. It could be, we want to close a $100,000 gift in this meeting. It could be, this meeting, the goal is to talk to them about board recruitment and how they might lean in. I don't know. I'm just riffing. But instead of writing the speech, here's the map, the meeting goal, 3 key points, right? Just 3. 1 story, maybe a secondary story just in case, but 1 story chosen for the person you're sitting across the table with. Likely questions. And then I like to give my CEO language to use when kind of transitioning from topic to topic. So this just took years to learn, which was I would kind of map out the meeting for my CEO, and then what would happen is I didn't really think through how to transition from this topic to the next thing on the agenda. And so then it got weird. So then I started putting in language to help transition. Language to use when the CEO does not know an answer. It's okay not to know the answers. And then language to use when handing the conversation back to you. So, for example, a CEO could say something like, "Oh, Mary knows your history with this program better than I do. So I'm going to ask her to share what we've been discussing." Or something like, "That's an important question. Mary, would you talk about how this opportunity has been shaped around other donors' priorities?" Or I would love for Mary to talk you through what the investment would make possible. Like these transitions, they keep the meeting coordinated, and you really want that coordinated feel. And frankly, the CEO doesn't have to carry the whole conversation. Okay, one other important thing is body language. Let's talk about that because this can feel awkward because you're coaching your boss and you may be thinking, "Am I really supposed to tell the CEO not to cross their arms?" Maybe, maybe so, but you do not need to make it personal about them. I frame body language as part of like the donor experience. So I say things like, "I want us to think about how we create a conversation rather than a presentation." Or, this donor tends to be thoughtful and reserved. So we may want to slow the pace and leave more space after questions. Um, or I'll say something like, they're going to be more likely to respond better if we sit beside them rather than directly across a large conference table. And then here are some things to talk to your CEO about. Eye contact, right? The CEO should make eye contact with the donor, especially when the donor is speaking. The CEO, no phone, no Apple Watch, looking at the donor when they're speaking. Not at the fundraiser, not at the board member, not at notes on the table, all the things. Okay, posture is the other thing. An open posture signals interest. So, leaning slightly forward can show engagement, crossed arms, constantly checking a phone, sitting far back in the chair. It may unintentionally communicate distance, and we don't want that. Um, okay, facial expressions. So, a donor may share something emotional or personal. The CEO needs to respond as a human before responding as an executive, right? Like pause, acknowledge what was shared. Do not immediately pivot back to how they can make a gift. I mean, things like that. The other the other big thing that I coach my CEOs on are pace. So like nervous people can speak very quickly. Busy CEOs can speak very quickly. Donors may need more time to absorb information. So, coach your CEO to slow down, especially when explaining the vision, the impact, or like the reason for a gift. And then silence. As you know, fundraiser, silence is important. And silence is not an emergency. So please tell your CEO this before the meeting. When the donor's thinking, let them think. When the fundraiser makes the ask, let the donor respond. Like, don't rescue the donor from this moment, CEO. And definitely do not start lowering the amount. Like, that's something that I've experienced firsthand and it wasn't great. Like if the fundraiser says, "We would like you to consider a gift of $100,000. The donor pauses. The CEO panics and says, "Of course, it could be 50,000 or 25,000 or whatever feels comfortable." No, no, no. Prepare your CEO for the silence. That way they don't jump in and do something rash. And then important to prepare for objections without becoming defensive. So donor objections are another area where CEOs, like the preparation really matters and enormously. CEOs may hear a donor's question and think criticism. Like if the donor says, "Why are your administrative expenses so high?" The CEO hears, "You're running this organization poorly," even though the donor didn't even say that. Or another example would be like the donor says, "How has this not been solved already?" And the CEO hears, "You have failed." The donor says, "How do I know this program will work?" The CEO might hear, "I don't trust you." Like the emotional reaction can cause a CEO to become defensive or overly detailed and sometimes argumentative in my experience. So before the meeting, remind your CEO that questions are often signs of engagement. An uninterested donor isn't going to ask you anything. A serious donor is going to ask you those difficult questions. They're testing the investment, they're trying to understand risk, they're deciding whether the organization's leadership is prepared and thoughtful and honest. So teach your CEO a very simple objection framework. And this is what I've used: acknowledge, clarify, respond, reconnect. So here it is in practice. So first, acknowledge the concern. That's such a fair question. Then clarify. When you ask about sustainability, are you thinking primarily about funding after the first year or about our ability to maintain the staffing? Then respond. Here's how we've built sustainability into the plan. And then reconnect the answer to the original outcome. So something like that structure is what allows us to make sure your investment creates long-term capacity rather than a short-term burst of activity. This keeps the CEO from answering the wrong question, right? They hear a question which might not be the question that was actually asked. And we all do that. We're all human. It also shows the donor that leadership is listening before leadership responds. And to that note, one of the most confidence building things a CEO can say is, "I don't want to give you an incomplete answer. Let me confirm that and follow up." So give your CEO permission not to know everything. That does not make your CEO look weak. It makes your CEO look responsible. A donor will usually respect an honest answer more than a confident guess. So before the meeting, identify questions that should be redirected or answered later, like financial details may need to come from the CFO. That's okay. Program data may need to come from the program lead. That's cool. Legal or tax questions may require another expert. Like don't let your CEO feel responsible for just knowing everything. Like that's a lot of weight to carry, and you want them to be light and confident, not prepared for to go to battle. Okay. Next is who is going to make the ask. So if the goal of this meeting is to make an ask, you have to decide who's going to do that. And this is a conversation you need to have before the meeting. Okay. Do not decide this through eye contact in the room. do not reach the solicitation moment and suddenly turn to your CEO with a hopeful expression. Like actually practice the ask. Decide who's going to say the donor's name, who's going to name the opportunity, who's going to say the amount, what the amount should be, who will stop talking. Like sometimes the CEO should make the ask. Like if the CEO has a stronger relationship with the donor, absolutely. The CEO also may be the most credible person to communicate the urgency and the institutional commitment. But sometimes the fundraiser should make the ask. You may know the donor better. You may have been building toward this moment for months. You may be better prepared to say the amount clearly and hold the silence. So your CEO is still playing a very important role, right? They literally represent leadership in the room. And if your CEO can say something like this is just like parade worthy. This is one of the most important priorities our organization will take on over the next 3 years. We believe it is going to fundamentally change what is possible for the people we serve. Ah, dreamy. And then that's when you pop in and say, Linda, we would love for you to consider a leadership gift of $250,000 to make this expansion possible. So leadership is not diminished because the fundraiser makes the ask. This is a team sport. And then remember, good donor meetings, like you have to rehearse the handoff. It should really feel conversational, but that doesn't mean it's unplanned. How will you introduce the CEO? How will the CEO move from vision into a story? How will you move from the opportunity into asking this person for a gift? What happens after the donor responds? How will you transition from the story into the funding opportunity? Like, you don't need a theatrical production fundraiser, but you do need enough preparation so that no one's surprised. So here's a simple meeting structure. The fundraiser welcomes the donor, sets the purpose. The fundraiser asks an opening question, right? The donor speaks, the CEO listens and responds. The CEO shares a vision or mission story. The fundraiser then connects that story to the donor's interests, right? And right there, I mean, that's like 30 minutes already. The opportunity is presented, the ask is made if appropriate, the donor is going to respond. The fundraiser confirms next steps. The CEO closes with gratitude and confidence. That's the kind of structure that allows the CEO to be powerful without taking over. Okay, next, you have to debrief immediately. Like after the meeting, do not wave goodbye to the donor, get in separate cars, and wait to talk about this for like 4 days. Debrief while the conversation is fresh. Like, I want you to ask your CEO, what do you think the donor responded to? What seemed to create energy between the three of us? Where do you think there was hesitation from the donor? Uh, do you think the donor asked the right questions? And did we answer them properly? What did we promise to follow up with? And who's going to do that? When should the next contact happen? And then I want you to ask your CEO too, like what felt natural? What felt uncomfortable? When did you feel most confident? What would help you prepare for the next meeting we have? Like, this is how CEOs become stronger fundraising partners. It's not through one training session. It's through like, first you prepare, then you have the experience, then you do the feedback and you make some changes, and then it's just repetition. So, to kind of wrap this all up, the CEO's real job in the meeting is not to impress the donor. They need to connect with the donor. They don't need to have every answer. They need to demonstrate thoughtful leadership. They do not need to sell the organization. They need to help the donor see what's possible. And they do not need to become you. They need to become the best version of themselves in that donor context. So some CEOs are just naturally warm and relational. Use that. Some CEOs are brilliant strategic thinkers. Help them communicate the big picture. Some CEOs are quiet but deeply sincere. Do not force them to become a motivational speaker. Help them use their sincerity. Some CEOs are brilliant storytellers but need help understanding why listening is important. Coach the listening. Some CEOs are going to love fundraising meetings and some would rather like reorganize the supply closet. But meet them where they are, prepare them, give them a clear role, help them understand the donor and rehearse the difficult moments. Remind them why their presence matters. Because when a donor meets the CEO or spends time with the CEO, the donor is not only evaluating a project, they're evaluating leadership. I mean, they're asking themselves, do these people understand the project? Do they understand the problem? Do they have a credible plan? Are they going to use my gift wisely? Will they tell me the truth? Can they create the change that they're promising? Like, your CEO can help you answer all those questions, and not by delivering a perfect presentation, but by showing up prepared, listening carefully, speaking clearly, and then leading with confidence. So your assignment, dear fundraiser, should you take it on, is before your CEO's next donor meeting, I want you to schedule like a 30-minute prep conversation. Do not just send a briefing document that probably won't get read. Like, talk, give your CEO the 5 things: the purpose of the meeting, the donor's primary motivation, the 3 most important messages, decide the one story that you want the donor to remember, and practice the most difficult question the donor may ask. Then all you need to do is decide roles, practice transitions, and practice the ask. And practice what everyone will do after the ask is made. Because sometimes we know that the silence needs to land and the donor needs a second to think about things. The CEOs don't always know that. So this meeting, this coaching and preparation, it can completely change your CEO's experience. Like, a well-prepared CEO is likely to feel confident. They're going to be more present. They're more likely to build trust. And then trust is where major gifts start. So, fundraiser, your CEO can be one of your greatest major gift partners, but that partnership requires preparation. So you don't want to hope that the meeting just goes well, pray to the fundraising gods, coach it to go well. And when your CEO walks out of that meeting knowing they helped the donor believe more deeply in the mission, that is when they will begin to understand why major gift fundraising is so powerful and so amazing. I hope this episode helps you prepare your CEO for the next conversation. And if you want more help knowing what to say before, during, and after a donor meeting, take a look at the Major Gift Meeting Mastery. It walks you through the total structure of different conversations, whether it's the first meeting or the third meeting or the fifth meeting, and all of the things that you need to do to keep the relationship moving forward. Because you should never walk into a major donor meeting hoping everybody knows what to do, including you. You want to walk in ready. Okay, fundraiser, I'll see you next time. Fundraiser, thank you for being here. This work you do, it matters. You are the bridge between generosity and impact, and don't let anyone, including the hard weeks, convince you otherwise. If today's episode gave you something useful, please pass it along. One share, one text to a colleague, one review on Apple Podcasts. That's how this show reaches the people who need it most. Come find me at heyfundraiser.com, and I'll see you next Friday.